That's great. Okay, so hello, John. Thank you very much for being with us. And good evening, of course. So this is John Christmas, everyone, and he's the author of KGB Banker, along with William Burton McCormick. And it has recently even won an award. It was a best-selling thriller novel. And we're selling it and we're promoting it as Dark Camilleri. It's one of the books in our collection that we're promoting. And here today we have John Christmas, whom we're going to interview about the book and even about his story. So John was a banker who worked at Parex Bank, which eventually became ABLV Bank. And for us Maltese, we know about ABLV, especially because it was connected to the electrogas scandal when Daphne Caruana Galizia was revealing that kickbacks were transferred between the back then CEO of Electrogas, Jürgen Fenech, to government officials, including the Minister of Energy, Konrad Mitzi, and Chief of Staff of the Prime Minister, Keith Camry. And there were even investigations initiated by the authorities on ABLV Bank, which have been initiated thanks to the reporting of Daphne Caruana Galizia herself. And I can even show you some links if you give me some time to share the screen. Yes. So, for example, we can see here one of the statements from Daphne Caruana Galizia Foundation, which describes the raid by the authorities initiated on the reports about the money laundering, which took place through ABLV, where Azeri officials from SOCAR were transferring money to 17 Black Jürgen Fenech's company from ABLV. And well, it was very contrasting to what happened in Malta, where authorities, unfortunately, didn't initiate such detailed and very intensive investigations. But this is just to give some background. And here with us, we have, in fact, John Christmas, who actually worked at the bank, which previously, which then became ABLV. And he even actually wrote a story about his experience at the bank. He's also a whistleblower. And the story is in the novel that we have just mentioned. And today, John is here with us to explain and give us more details about his story. So in order to start, John, can you please tell us a little bit about you and your background, where you're coming from, your education, your career?
Sure. First of all, I'll say, Mark, thank you for inviting me for this interview. And also, it was an honor to have KGB Banker at the Dark Camilleri stand at the Malta Book Festival. It was an excellent event, and we were very proud to be together with you represented at the event.
Thank you. We are very happy
I'll
to have
also
you,
quickly say something about the 300 police officers in Riga who raided ABLV Bank. Don't be too quick to assume that the Latvians are necessarily helping, because ABLV was actually closed already 2 years before. And I assume 2 years ago, 2 years earlier, the police should have already taken every hard drive and every file out of that bank. So when I read that there were these 300 police officers going in 2 years after the bank had already been closed, I sensed that this was something theatrical that they were doing. But, you know, I hope that they are trying with this investigation. And it is sort of another similar thing to my experience, because my experience was more with the Russian KGB and these banks. But in that case, the government of Azerbaijan is KGB as well. I mean, Aliyev came from the KGB, so I guess they use the same banking system.
All right.
About myself and my upbringing. So I'm originally from Chicago. I was born in Chicago and I grew up there, went to school there, studied in university. I started a banking career there. I had certain ideas about, you know, the way things are supposed to work as far as education and work and banking. I mean, with banking, the bank I worked for there, to the best of my knowledge, was completely legitimate. I mean, we just had regular accounts for regular people who were saving their money in there. And then we made loans to home buyers, and we also made loans to local companies that were expanding. So the experience which I later had in Latvia was quite a bit different from that.
All right, and can you explain to us your transition from the US to Latvia? What happened, and how did you decide to go to Latvia then?
Well, I have a connection lifelong with Latvia, which is that my mother was born in Latvia, so I am half Latvian. And my name is not Latvian because my father's not Latvian, but my mother is Latvian. And when I was a kid, there's a Latvian center in Michigan. It's a summer camp. So I was growing up in Chicago, and in the summer, I would go to this summer camp in Michigan that was for the Latvian exile community. And they would teach us stuff like Latvian language and Latvian crafts and folk songs and folk dances. And there were outdoor sports and stuff. So this was my original contact with the Latvians. And then it got bigger when Latvia went independent, because when Latvia went independent in the 1990s, they offered that people in the United States who had any of their grandparents were from Latvia were eligible to get Latvian passports. So I had actually never been to Latvia at that point, but I mailed in a letter to the Latvian embassy in Washington, D.C. With my photo and some questionnaire that I filled out, and they sent me back this passport from Latvia, which was kind of a novelty for me then because I had never actually been to the place. But you know, later it became a European Union passport, so it's something valuable now. The unlucky thing I had happen was that I joined the American Chamber of Commerce in Latvia in the 1990s and started making business contacts there. And through the American Chamber of Commerce, I met a gentleman from Parex Bank who recruited me and convinced me to go to work there. And it seemed like this really great opportunity because they were, Parex Bank was the largest bank in the country. I was the Western representative, so the Western banks and Western institutions that they dealt with, that I would represent them. I flew to some conferences representing them. It was a really great job until I started learning about all the mafia stuff.
And okay, so, but give us some time before going to the scandals of Parex Bank, which eventually led it to its implosion. How was your progression at the bank, at Parex Bank? I would assume that you would have had to be trusted in order to eventually discover great misdeeds at the bank. Tell us a bit your story at the bank. What did you used to do, and what did the bank used to do? What it was supposed to be doing, and then we can go to what actually it was doing.
Well, there were bad rumors about Parex all the time, but what I witnessed in the beginning, I mean, when they hired me, is that you know, they would give me information like quarterly financial results, and they did different things. They got this anti-money laundering audit. They got all this material that was to promote themselves, basically. And they would give me this information, and they would say, when I meet with the Western bankers, this is what I should tell them. And I would get financial results audited by Ernst & Young. I would get this anti-money laundering audit was done by Deloitte. I mean, all this stuff said that the bank was clean and everything was okay. And then, you know, it was something I was proud to work there in the beginning, because we were the largest bank in Latvia. We were doing certain things that none of the other banks were doing, like initially we were getting syndicated loans from London and later even issued a bond, and none of the other Latvian banks had done that. But yeah, I guess their plan for me was to just to give me false information and then use me to show the false information to the Western people, but that I wouldn't necessarily know that the information was false. And then there was as I was there almost for 2 years, but as the time went on, there were more and more instances where I was in some kind of internal meeting and they started talking about things that were different, a reality that was different from what the information was that they were giving me.
Okay, and eventually, what did you begin to discover? You are saying that you were this Western contact, which they used to represent themselves as a clean and respectable facade. And then you started getting reports from the bank about the workings. You were, of course, beginning to be more involved. And what were your initial instances and encounters of misdeeds and criminal activity at the bank, which then made you realize that the bank was under doing large scales of fraudulent activity?
Well, I could maybe categorize this into 2 different categories. One thing is about United States dollar correspondent accounts. And a lot of people don't think about this, but it's an important thing for a bank to have a United States dollar correspondent account. This was a big issue actually in Malta recently, because BOV had been threatened that they would lose their US dollar correspondent account. Now at Parex Bank, the depositors there were 80,000 shell companies. We also had some normal accounts, like people with their names on the accounts, but the core, and those accounts would have been in euros, but the most of the accounts were in dollars, and those accounts were held by shell companies. And the rumor was that this is KGB money, that this is Kremlin money, or this is money embezzled from the Soviet Union by the KGB at the time that the Soviet Union collapsed. But it was very important for Parex, and they told me straight away from the beginning, was they need to keep having all the time a US dollar correspondent account. It's going to, you know, wreck their business if they don't have one, because they need to move a lot of dollars. And there were a couple banks, I recall one was Bank of New York and another was ABN AMRO, that while I was working there, I found out that both of those banks not only closed their US dollar correspondent account with us, but they also refused to talk with us anymore afterward. And they didn't say the reason why they did this, but I assume the reason why they did this is they figured out that a lot of corrupt funds were moving through the accounts, and the amounts of money could be enormous potentially. This is, you know, the United States dollar was important for Russia up until this year when they got blocked from using dollars. But in previous years, all the oil business, all the gas business, all the selling metals and minerals, this all is done in United States dollars, and therefore a lot of the money that gets skimmed off of the Russian government is in United States dollars going through these shell company accounts. So that was a reason why they need to keep these open. But it would make me a little bit nervous, of course, talking with one of the banks that still had a US dollar correspondent account and telling them things like, well, listen, we got this special anti-money laundering audit from Deloitte, and Deloitte says that we're completely clean and our AML is good. Which, you know, the whole experience made me lose faith in the big 4 auditors, but that was one of the things. And then with Ernst & Young on the other side, looking at the balance sheet, I went to these internal meetings where sometimes they would discuss loans that they had made, large loans that they had made. And each time, really, for every large loan that the bank made, there was some kind of criminal story behind it. I mean, there was an oligarch behind it. There was some kind of like corruption scandal, or in some cases, the loans were totally fake, where they just transferred $100 million somewhere to some borrower, but there was really no collateral and no way to get the loan back again. A couple of those people who were the recipients were really scary people. There was a time in 2018 when the US Treasury published, it wasn't a sanction list, but it was a warning list. It was called the Putin list, issued by the US Treasury in 2018. And a couple of the guys who were our biggest borrowers were on that list. So it seemed that what was going on with our lending was not correct, and what was going on, that's about our assets of the bank, but also about the money moving through the accounts. What was going on through the US dollar correspondent accounts was not correct either.
And wow, this is the criminal activity is very extensive. And what did you do eventually when you became aware of this extensive criminal activity? You eventually blew the whistle, right? And can you tell us the process you went through and how you eventually ended up blowing the whistle about this activity?
Well, I've got an anecdote for you for this one. So what I did in 2005 is I wrote down a list of material frauds that I knew about, and some of them were very easy to confirm. I mean, if the auditor tried at all, or if the regulator tried at all, they could have confirmed these things, but they didn't even try. I gave this list to the heads of several departments in the Latvian government, including to one particular guy who is going to come up later, who is Krišjānis Kariņš, who I actually know him. And at that time, he was Minister of the Economy, but he since became the Prime Minister. So I gave that information to them, and I went for a long holiday. I went to Greece, actually, and I was in Greece, and I was.
And you didn't inform the bank about this?
Well, the bank sort of found out, because it was not my intention for, well, it went in steps. Actually, first I gave the information to Ernst & Young, and then I went on a long skiing holiday to Argentina thinking that Ernst & Young was going to do something. They didn't do anything.
Okay.
And then I came back to Latvia.
And when was this? Because I would like to have the timeline covered, because then I would like to go to the financial crisis when eventually the bank imploded. So when was this that we are speaking about?
The information I gave to Ernst & Young was in August 2004. And
okay.
That's because my friends were going skiing in Argentina, and it's August is when they go skiing there. So I thought this was a perfect opportunity that I'll give the information to Ernst & Young before I go and join my friends. And then, I'll follow what's happening in the news there, and I just won't go back depending what's going on there. So, yeah, that was the first step. And then nothing happened. I mean, the authorities did not do anything, or Ernst & Young completely ignored the information. And then I came back briefly in 2005, and I wrote this letter to the heads of several government departments, including to Krišjānis Kariņš, who I actually knew him. I had met him before. And I knew his wife as well, who also comes up in this story. She's a doctor in Riga, and she actually was my doctor. So yeah, all of that. And then the scary thing that started happening is some colleagues from Parex started warning me, like, listen, the guys at the top of the bank, they're like really bad guys. They kill people. And this is what I was hearing from them. And then I left the country again. I was in Greece. And the most scary call is I got from a colleague who told me, like, listen, John, guys from the bank called me. They're asking if you have a car, and they're asking what kind of car you have, or if your girlfriend has a car, or what kind of car she has, and where do you keep your car? And I thought, well, that's an interesting thing for, like, the bank needs to know if I have a car, or if my girlfriend has a car, and where is my car? So pretty much I did not go back to Latvia again after that.
Wow. So in 2004, as soon as you blew the whistle to government officials, to authorities, to the auditor, instead of anything positive happening in your regard or investigations being triggered, you suddenly began to be threatened. The bank was threatening you, was trying to find things about you, and you literally left the country.
Right. And there was a delay of a few years before the bank actually collapsed, because for a few years they continued to borrow as much money as possible. I mean, they were making larger, organizing larger syndicated loans to themselves from foreign banks, and they also issued a bond. So between the time of the whistleblowing and the time of the actual collapse, they borrowed about €1 billion more, which also disappeared. But all of that could have been prevented if they had, if the auditor or if the government had shut down the bank at the time of the whistleblowing, then this additional losses would have been cut. Now, in the novel, this whole story is condensed, but in the real version, it was 2004 was the whistleblowing to Ernst & Young, 2005 to the government. 2008, the government started transferring billions of euros of tax money to the bank to fund deposit withdrawals. And 2009 is when the government signed this cover-up agreement with a development bank.
Yes, and then ABLV was created, right?
Well, 3 banks were created. Some of the deposits went to, I mean, all 3 are like horrible stories, but some of the deposits went, or some of the customers and employees went to a bank called Ūkio Bank in Lithuania, which later was in the headlines for, I'm not sure if you read about this, but a few years ago that they discovered that Ūkio Bank was had an account for a cellist, for a professional classical musician, a cellist from St. Petersburg. And apparently 2 billion euros had gone through this account for this cellist. And these were payments from the oligarch to this cellist, and the cellist turned out to be Vladimir Putin's longtime friend. So the speculation was that this cellist's account is not really belongs to the cellist, but the cellist is like a front for Putin and is Putin's account, and people are paying protection money through that. So that bank, Ūkio in Lithuania, which also got looted and collapsed, was one of them. Then another one was ABLV got a lot of the money, and then they got in trouble with lots of things. I mean, they were involved with electrogas. That was one thing, but other things as well, like looting Ukraine and looting Moldova as well. Now, all of this I've kind of condensed in the book into just one bank, but in the real story, there were several different banks involved. The KGB guys, they try to keep things confusing by using a few banks.
So let me ask a more general question about Russian influence and the perseverance of Russian influence in Latvia. Because, as you said, initially, KGB officials were laundering money with US dollars through Parex Bank. Then the banks collapsed. And yet, still, the banks which were formed out of the collapse of Parex Bank still kept being used as vehicles of money laundering for Russian officials, for Russian criminals connected to the Kremlin. So how extensive is Russian influence in Latvia, and how strong it is, because if it persevered through the financial crisis despite the failure of Parex Bank? And what are its challenges and dynamics today that Europe is now viewing Russia in a different way with the fact that it has invaded Ukraine? So can you tell us a bit about that? Because it is impressive, to say the least, that Russia could have such a control over a very important bank in a Baltic state, and commit this wide-scale criminal activity, money laundering, fraud. It's on an extensive scale. So how is this possible, and how is this changing today in the changing dynamics of politics today in Europe?
Well, One thing is that the amounts of money are mind-boggling. Okay, between Ukio Bank and ABLV Bank, then there's another one, Citadele Bank. That one is still operating. That one has been connected with not only using their own US dollar correspondent account to run through a lot of money, but they were also running money through the Estonian branch of Danske Bank, which was again like used like a front or a fall guy or something. I mean, I don't think the Danish people at Danske Bank necessarily knew what was going on at their branch in Estonia. But the amounts of money were apparently more than 200 billion euros that went through all these shell companies. Now, 200 billion euros is larger than the entire national economy of Latvia. It's larger than the economy of Malta. I think in Malta, the asset size of BOV is about 4 billion euros. So you can think about that. This was 200 billion euros. Now, obviously, this is enough money to bribe a lot of people. I mean, you can go to everybody in the parliament, everybody in the prosecutor's office, every judge, every police officer, and a lot of people outside the country as well. I mean, you can bribe everybody in Europe with 200 billion euros. And another issue to it is that I understand that the bribery is not really optional for the people who receive the bribes. So if the thought is that Latvians must be the most corrupt people in the whole world because they're all taking bribes. You know, when the mafia guys show up in your office and tell you you're working for them now, and they give you a bag of cash, you know, your other option is that they're going to kill you. So that's how they work these things. Now, there are things that the European Union can do and Malta can do, and I'll mention those later. But at that point, the amount of money going through was so large that they essentially control every department of the government. And you know, there's this atmosphere of fear that goes on there. Also, they all have blackmail on each other, and there's threats going around. And I guess, you know, 200 billion euros is just so much money that it's very hard to stop. It's like a tidal wave.
Wow, incredible. And you're right, that volume of money is very difficult to fight it in a small economy. And of course, unfortunately, we know that people can be corrupted. And the more money you have, the easier it will be, or at least the more options you have to corrupt and bribe people. So yes, and it's very unfortunate to hear, of course. But what about today, though? Is there a renewed spirit, let's just so to say, or a renewed indignation at this kind of activity now that Russia has invaded Ukraine? Is there a new renewed sense, look, that these things are wrong and we cannot do them again, we have to is there this kind of sense now in Latvia that things are changing in Europe?
Well, something I can say about Latvia, which is very different from Malta, is that they don't really have free media. The media blocks out some stories that it's incredible that the media can block these things out. One of the biggest ones is that Krišjānis Kariņš's wife was caught receiving 6 million euros transferred from a Cyprus company that's with links to Putin. It was a person who knows Putin was the owner of this Cyprus company. And nothing happened. The prosecutors didn't do anything. The media doesn't even follow up with this. Latvia just had a national election in October, and Krišjānis Kariņš won again. And you would think, I mean, I ask friends from different countries, like friends who are not Latvians, I say, listen, in your country, if the wife of the prime minister received 6 million euros from Putin, would that be like an election issue? I mean, would people like talk about that during the election and it would influence their decision? And it seems in Latvia, for most people, not. I mean, they don't know or they don't care, or like, I'm not really sure. Some people are really angry about this. Some people do know and they do follow this. And, you know, the evidence actually comes out from some opposition politicians. It does not come out from the mainstream media. The mainstream media doesn't mention these things. But he still is the prime minister. And another thing is the cover-up. I mean, this is from the plot of KGB Banker. I simplified it. I mean, it's the same kind of countries. And anyway, in KGB Banker, I also made it into a military thing, which I think it is in real life, that part of the idea with all this financial destruction is to actually weaken up these countries for war. But with this cover-up, which is essentially where the Latvian government started paying this publicly funded development bank called the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, in 2009, and this was the final cover-up against my whistleblowing, the EBRD came to Latvia. They said that they did a due diligence studying the assets of Parex Bank, and they found out that, you know, everything was okay, which I was shocked by because it wasn't okay. I mean, the loans were fake there. And then they announced that they invested all this money in a stake in Parex Bank. And I thought, well, that's really crazy because they're going to lose all their money. I mean, they bought stock in a bank that's been looted, so all their money is lost. But then later, the documents indicated that it was a fake investment, that Latvia privatized that bank to the EBRD by secretly paying even more to the EBRD to make that investment. It's like if you have a fraudulent bank and you ask somebody who's reputable to, you know, invest €1 million in your bank, and he says, no, of course not, because I don't trust your bank. And they'd say, like, listen, I'll secretly give you €2 million, but you need to publicly invest €1 million in my bank because I need this for the PR purposes. It's sort of like that, like buying an investor or buying a front. I mean, people do it traditionally with board directors, like they hire famous people with good reputations to be board directors. And in this case, what they did is they purchased a shareholder. So
yes, I'm sorry to stop you, John, but if I may add a point, because our time is closing because we only have 1 hour. It's
oh, sure, but that's still going. And my point also is that, you know, in KGB Banker, we have, in the thriller novel, we have a conclusion. I mean, the thriller novel is supposed to be something fun and exciting, and it has a conclusion. In the real story, there's no conclusion. It's actually still going because they're still paying the EBRD to be an investor in this thing called Citadel Bank.
All right. We will discuss this next time in more detail. But to conclude on your previous point, I was going to say that it's actually very suspicious, in fact, when you find that famous people or politicians suddenly have ended up on board directors or directors of a company, and because, as you say, this is usually done for PR purposes. So thank you very much, John. Your book, KGB Banker, which tells your story in a fictitious way, is available on our website for sale, and you can buy it online, and it's delivered by post for free. The book has won several awards, has been a best-selling thriller in the US and in the UK, and it will also be available in Maltese bookshops very soon. So, John, thank you very much for being with us today. We'll be very happy to continue this discussion another time, because there's a lot to speak about. There's a lot of angles to the story, and a lot of sub-stories in your story, because you were exposed to a wide-scale network and activity of fraud and illicit activity. You are actually at the heart of this. So I'm sure you have plenty of things to share with us. So thank you again. And
my last comment, just William Burton McCormick, my co-author, did an amazing job with the suspense in the book. It gets scary. Some people, like, you know, they have to put it down sometimes because they get scared. But he's a master of suspense. We did win 2 awards, and our partnership worked great. And I think the novel turned out to be something really special. I think that people interested in this stuff will love it.
Yes, I recommend the book as well. I've read it as well. So thank you very much, John. We'll
Thank you,
see you
Mark.
again another time. Thank you, and happy holidays.
Happy holidays.